I spent 6 months sewing my daughter's wedding dress, and she threw it back in my face like garbage. Hello, everyone watching from wherever you are in the world. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And please, before I go any further, check the description box below. There are more stories like mine down there, stories about betrayal, heartbreak, and what happens when you finally stand up for yourself. You might need them someday. I know I wish I'd heard one before I lived through mine. My name is Eleanor. I'm 63 years old, and I've been sewing since I was 7. My mother taught me on an old Singer machine in our kitchen in Indiana, the kind with the cast iron base and the foot pedal that clunked when you pressed it too hard. She used to say that every stitch you make carries a piece of your heart, and if you sew with love, the person who wears it will feel it. I believed that my whole life. I believed it when I made my wedding dress in 1982. I believed it when I sewed Halloween costumes for my daughter Claire, every October for 15 years. And I believed it when she called me last spring and told me she was getting married. Claire is my only child. Her father David passed away 4 years ago from a heart attack, sudden and cruel, and since then it's just been the two of us. Or at least, that's what I thought. After David died, Claire moved to Charlotte for work, some corporate marketing job that paid well but kept her busy. We talked on the phone every Sunday, but the calls got shorter. She was always rushing to a meeting, always tired, always somewhere else. I told myself it was normal. She was building a life. But when she told me about the engagement, I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Excitement, joy, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap and ask me to braid her hair. She was marrying a man named Trevor. I'd never met him. She showed me pictures on her phone during one of her brief visits home. Tall, clean-cut, worked in finance, came from money. Old money, she said, the kind that didn't talk about itself. His parents were hosting the wedding at their estate outside Asheville, some sprawling property with gardens and a view of the mountains. Everything would be taken care of, she said. Everything would be perfect. But then she asked me about the dress. We were sitting in my living room, the same floral couch I'd had since Claire was in high school, and she pulled out her phone to show me photos of gowns she'd been looking at online. Sleek, modern, expensive, designer names I couldn't pronounce, price tags that made my stomach turn. I watched her scroll and swipe, and I felt something tighten in my chest. David had left me a small life insurance policy, enough to keep the house and get by, but not enough for a $10,000 dress. Before I could say anything, Claire sighed and set her phone down. "Mom," she said, "I know money's tight. I don't expect you to pay for it. Trevor's parents already offered." The way she said it, casual, dismissive, like it was a given, stung more than I wanted to admit. I looked at her sitting there in her tailored blazer and her perfectly styled hair, and I barely recognized her. When had she become someone who let other people pay for everything? When had she stopped needing me? What if I made it? I said. She blinked. "Made what?" "Your dress. I could sew it for you." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me like I'd suggested we hold the reception in a barn. "Mom, I don't know." "I made my wedding dress," I said. "I made yours for your kindergarten graduation, your prom dress, remember? You said it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever worn." "That was different. This is my wedding." "Exactly," I said. "It's your wedding. It should mean something." She hesitated, and I saw it, just a flicker of the girl she used to be, the one who believed in things like hand-sewn hems and love stitched into fabric. But then she smiled, polite and distant, and nodded. "Okay," she said. "If you really want to." I started the next day. I went to the fabric store in town, the one that still smelled like dust and cotton and old wood floors, and I spent hours running my fingers over bolts of silk and satin and lace. I chose ivory silk charmeuse, soft as water, and French lace for the bodice, delicate as a spiderweb. I bought seed pearls and silk thread and boning for the corset. I spent money I didn't have because I wanted it to be perfect. Every evening after work, I clean houses 3 days a week to make ends meet. I came home and sat at my sewing machine. I worked by lamplight, my reading glasses slipping down my nose, my hands cramping as I guided the fabric under the needle. I drafted the pattern by hand, taking measurements from a dress Claire had left in her old closet and adjusting for the style she'd shown me in those photos. I sewed the bodice first, piece by piece, fitting the lace overlay and hand-stitching each pearl into place. Then the skirt, layers of silk that flowed like water when I held them up to the light. I thought about her the whole time. I thought about the little girl who used to sit on the floor beside me, watching the needle go up and down, asking me to teach her. I thought about the teenager who cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart, and the young woman who held my hand at David's funeral and promised we'd be okay. I thought about the kind of mother I'd been, and the kind of mother I still wanted to be. It took me 6 months. 6 months of late nights and aching fingers and fabric slipping through my hands. When I finally finished, I stood back and looked at it hanging on the dress form in my spare bedroom, and I cried. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever made. The silk caught the light like moonlight on water. The lace looked like it had been spun by angels. Every stitch was perfect. I couldn't wait to show her. I called Claire and told her it was ready. She said she'd come by the following weekend. I spent the entire week cleaning the house, baking her favorite lemon bars, rehearsing what I'd say when she saw it. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt making it, the love, the care, the hours I'd poured into every seam. When she arrived, she was distracted. She checked her phone twice before she even took off her coat. I led her upstairs to the spare bedroom, my heart pounding, and opened the door. The dress hung there in the afternoon light, glowing. "Here it is," I said, my voice shaking. "Your wedding dress." She stepped forward. She reached out and touched the lace. And then she wrinkled her nose. "This looks like something from a thrift store," she said. I felt the words like a slap. "What?" "I mean, it's nice, Mom. It's fine. But it's not really what I had in mind." She pulled her hand back. "Trevor's mom already found a designer in New York. She's overnighting a dress for me to try on next week." She turned and walked out of the room. I stood there alone, staring at the dress, and I felt something inside me crack. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and smiled and told her I understood. But I didn't understand. And I wasn't going to let it end like this. If you've ever poured your heart into something, only to have someone you love toss it aside without a second thought, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. And if you want to see what I did next, trust me, you won't see it coming, then keep watching. I didn't speak to Claire for 2 weeks after that day, and she didn't call me either. I kept the dress hanging in the spare bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to take it down. Every time I walked past that room, I felt the weight of those 6 months pressing against my chest. Every late night, every hand-stitched pearl, every careful seam. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd looked at it like it was trash. But here's the thing about being a mother: you don't stop loving your child just because they hurt you. You don't stop wanting to be part of their life. So when the wedding invitation arrived in the mail, ivory cardstock with gold lettering, I opened it and read it and told myself I'd go. I'd smile. I'd sit in the back and watch her marry Trevor, and I'd be graceful about the whole thing. At least, that's what I told myself. The invitation said the ceremony would be at 2 in the afternoon at the estate in Asheville, followed by a reception in the gardens. Cocktail attire requested. I didn't have anything nice enough for a wedding like that, so I went to the mall and bought a simple navy dress off the clearance rack. It was fine. Unremarkable. Exactly the kind of thing a mother wears when she's trying not to draw attention to herself. But the night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Claire's face when she'd looked at the dress I made. The disgust in her voice. The way she'd dismissed 6 months of my life like it was nothing. And I thought about David, about how he used to tell me I was too soft, too forgiving, that I let people walk all over me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd spent so long trying to be the kind of mother who never caused problems that I'd forgotten how to stand up for myself. I got out of bed at 3 in the morning and went to the spare bedroom. I stood in front of the dress, the silk glowing faintly in the moonlight coming through the window, and I made a decision. If Claire didn't want to wear what I made, fine. But I wasn't going to let her forget it. I took the dress off the hanger and folded it carefully into a garment bag. Then I went to my closet and pulled out the navy dress I'd bought. I looked at it for a long time. And then I put it back. Instead, I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years. A gown I'd sewn for myself decades ago, long before Claire was born, back when I used to make clothes just for the joy of it. It was deep emerald green, floor-length, fitted at the waist with a flowing skirt and delicate beadwork along the neckline. I'd made it for a gala David and I had attended in the 80s, and I'd felt like a queen in it. I hadn't had a reason to wear it since. I tried it on. It still fit. The fabric still moved like water. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a woman in her 60s trying to blend into the background. I saw someone who had something to say. I packed the emerald dress in a separate bag, along with the wedding dress Claire had rejected. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't showing up to that wedding like some quiet, apologetic ghost. The drive to Asheville took 4 hours. I left early before dawn, the roads still empty and dark. I listened to old records on the car stereo, Joni Mitchell, Fleetwood Mac, the kind of music that reminded me of being young and fearless. By the time I pulled up to the estate, the sun was just starting to rise over the mountains, casting everything in gold. The place was enormous. A sprawling white mansion with columns and manicured lawns and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. There were already people setting up, caterers unloading trucks, florists arranging bouquets, chairs being placed in neat rows on the lawn. I parked near the main house and sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I could still turn around. I could still put on the navy dress and sit quietly in the back and let this day be about Claire and Trevor and their perfect life. But I didn't. I grabbed both garment bags and walked up to the house. A woman in a headset and a clipboard met me at the door. She looked harried, distracted, already dealing with a dozen small crises. "Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor," I said. "Claire's mother." Her expression shifted immediately, polite but dismissive. "Oh, of course. The ceremony starts at 2. Guests are gathering on the lawn at 1:30. "I know," I said. "I'm here to drop something off for Claire. Her dress." The woman frowned. "Her dress? She already has her dress. It arrived from New York yesterday." "I know," I said again. "But she might want a backup. Just in case." The woman hesitated, glancing at her clipboard like it might have instructions for dealing with an overbearing mother. Finally, she sighed and gestured toward a hallway. "She's in the East Wing getting ready. Room at the end of the hall. But please don't take long, she's on a very tight schedule." I thanked her and walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The house smelled like lilies and money. I passed rooms with high ceilings and chandeliers and furniture that probably cost more than my car. When I reached the room at the end of the hall, I knocked softly. "Come in," Claire called. I opened the door. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, wearing the designer dress Trevor's mother had bought. It was stunning, I'll admit that. Sleek, modern, strapless with a mermaid silhouette and a long train. She looked beautiful. But she didn't look like my daughter. She glanced at me in the mirror, barely meeting my eyes. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart." I stepped inside, holding the garment bag. "I brought something for you." She turned, frowning. "What?" I unzipped the bag and pulled out the dress I'd made, the ivory silk, the French lace, the hand-stitched pearls. I held it up. "Just in case you change your mind," I said. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then she let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mom. Seriously?" "I spent 6 months on this," I said quietly. "I thought you might want to at least look at it." "I already told you, I have a dress." She gestured to the designer gown. "This one. The one that actually looks like a wedding dress." "Right," I said. I folded the dress carefully and set it on a chair in the corner. "Well, it's here if you need it." I turned to leave, but then I stopped. I looked back at her, standing there in her perfect dress in her perfect room with her perfect life, and I felt that crack inside me widen. "You know," I said, "your father would have been so proud to see you today." Her expression softened, just a little. "I know. He always said you were going to do great things. He believed in you, no matter what." "I miss him," she said quietly. "So do I." I paused. But he also used to tell me that the people who love you deserve more than your leftovers. More than the scraps of attention you have left over after everyone else gets what they want. She blinked. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired of being an afterthought, Claire. My voice was steady, calm. I'm tired of being the person you only call when you need something, and then forget about the second someone more important walks into the room. That's not fair. Isn't it? I stepped closer. When's the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really asked, not just as a formality before you launch into whatever you need from me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. That's what I thought, I said. I turned and walked toward the door. Enjoy your wedding, sweetheart. I'll see you out there. I left the room before she could respond, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Check the description below if you want to know what happened next, or better yet, just keep watching. Because what I did at that reception, she never saw it coming. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give her that. Claire walked down the aisle in her designer gown, her face glowing, her hand tucked into the arm of Trevor's father since her own father wasn't there to do it. I sat 3 rows from the back, surrounded by people I didn't know, and I watched her say her vows under an arch of white roses. She looked happy, radiant, even. And for a moment, I felt that old pull, the instinct to be happy for her no matter what, to swallow my hurt and just be glad she was smiling. But then I thought about the dress folded in the garment bag in my car, and the feeling passed. The reception was held in the gardens behind the mansion, under a massive white tent strung with lights. There were round tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of peonies and hydrangeas, a live band playing soft jazz as guests filtered in from the ceremony. I found my assigned seat at a table near the edge of the tent, far from the head table where Claire and Trevor sat with his parents. I wasn't surprised. I was lucky I'd been invited at all. I sat down and sipped champagne I didn't want and made small talk with strangers who didn't care. An older couple from Trevor's side asked me polite questions about Claire growing up, and I gave polite answers, smiling the whole time. Yes, she was always ambitious. Yes, she was a wonderful daughter. Yes, I was so proud. But inside, I was counting down. Dinner was served, filet mignon, roasted vegetables, some kind of fancy salad with goat cheese and berries. I barely tasted it. I kept glancing toward the entrance of the tent, waiting. The sun was starting to set, casting everything in that golden hazy light that makes everything look like a dream. The band played. People laughed. Claire and Trevor stood up to dance their first dance, and everyone clapped. And then I stood up. I excused myself from the table, walked out of the tent, and headed back to my car. The gravel crunched under my heels as I crossed the driveway. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the trunk and pulled out the second garment bag, the one with the emerald green gown I'd sewn for myself all those years ago. I changed in the bathroom of the main house, the one with the marble counters and the gold fixtures. I took off the plain navy dress and slipped into the emerald gown, zipping it up carefully. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. I wasn't trying to upstage Claire. I wasn't trying to steal attention or cause a scene. I was just reminding her, and everyone else, that I was still here. That I still mattered. I walked back to the tent, my head high, the emerald fabric flowing behind me like water. And the second I stepped through the entrance, I felt it, the shift in the room. People turned. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed me as I crossed the floor toward my table. I heard whispers, saw heads lean together, felt the weight of all that attention pressing against me. But I didn't stop. I didn't look down. I just walked, slow and steady, like I had every right to be exactly where I was. And then I saw Claire. She was standing near the head table, mid-conversation with one of Trevor's aunts, a glass of champagne in her hand. She glanced toward the entrance, probably out of habit, and her eyes landed on me. Her face went white. Not pale. Not flushed. White. Like every drop of blood had drained out of her in an instant. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her hand frozen halfway to her lips. And in that moment, I knew she understood. She understood that I wasn't the quiet, invisible mother she'd been dismissing for months. She understood that I'd made a choice. And she understood that everyone in that tent was now looking at me, wondering who I was, noticing me in a way they never would have if I'd just worn the navy dress and stayed in the background. I sat down at my table, smoothed my skirt, and picked up my champagne glass. Trevor's mother leaned over to someone beside her and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw her eyes flick toward me, sharp and assessing. Claire set her glass down hard enough that I heard it clink from across the tent. She said something to Trevor, then turned and walked toward the bathroom, her movements quick and jerky. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, the woman with the headset appeared at my table. She crouched down beside me, her expression strained but professional. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly. "The bride has asked if you could possibly step out for a moment. She'd like to speak with you." "Of course," I said. I stood up, smoothed my dress again, and followed her out of the tent. Claire was waiting near the side entrance, her arms crossed, her face flushed now instead of white. The second she saw me, she stepped forward. "What the hell are you doing?" she hissed. "I'm attending your wedding," I said calmly. "Just like you invited me to." "You know what I mean. That dress. Everyone's staring at you." "I know." She blinked. "You know?" "Yes. I wanted them to." Her mouth opened and closed, like she couldn't find the words. "Why would you do this? Today of all days?" "Because you made me feel invisible, Claire." My voice didn't shake. I didn't raise it. I just spoke, clear and steady. "You threw away 6 months of my life like it was garbage. You barely spoke to me in the weeks leading up to today. You seated me at the back of the tent like I was some distant relative you were obligated to invite. So yes, I wore a dress that people would notice. Because I'm your mother, and I matter." "This is my wedding," she said, her voice breaking. "You're supposed to support me. Not make it about you." "I spent 6 months supporting you," I said. "I gave you everything I had. And you looked at it and said it wasn't good enough." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't soften. "Not yet. I'm not trying to ruin your day," I said. "But I'm not going to disappear just because it makes you more comfortable." She stared at me for a long moment, her face twisted with anger and hurt and something I couldn't quite name. Then she turned and walked back into the tent without another word. I stood there alone in the fading light, my heart pounding, and I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. But then I thought about the way people had looked at me when I walked in. The way I'd felt standing there in that dress. And I knew deep down that I'd done exactly what I needed to do. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you. I know this isn't easy to hear. But sometimes the hardest stories are the ones we need most. Check the description below for more stories like this. Stories about standing up, fighting back, and refusing to be invisible. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I went back to my table, finished my champagne, and stayed until the very end. I watched Claire and Trevor cut the cake, watched them dance with their friends, watched the bouquet toss and the sparkler send-off. I smiled when people looked at me. I made small talk. I acted like everything was fine. But Claire didn't look at me once. I drove home that night in the dark, the emerald dress folded carefully in the passenger seat, and I cried the whole way. Not because I regretted what I'd done, I didn't. But because I knew I'd lost something I couldn't get back. I'd stood up for myself, and it had cost me my daughter. At least, that's what I thought. 2 weeks went by. I didn't hear from Claire. I didn't call her either. I went back to work, cleaned houses, came home to an empty house that felt quieter than it ever had before. I took the wedding dress, the one I'd made, and packed it away in a box in the attic. I couldn't look at it anymore. And then, on a Tuesday morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and there she was. Claire. Standing on my porch in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart." We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what to say. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside, and she walked into the living room. She sat down on the floral couch, the one I'd had forever, and I sat beside her. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. I owe you an apology, she said finally. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I was horrible to you, she continued, her voice shaking. The way I treated you, the things I said about the dress, it was cruel. And you didn't deserve it. No, I said. I didn't. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. Trevor's mother has been a lot. Ever since we got engaged, she's been planning everything, controlling everything. And I let her, because it was easier than fighting. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that you were the one who was actually there for me my whole life. Not her. You. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. When you walked into that reception in that dress, she said, her voice breaking, I was so angry. But then I went back to my table, and Trevor's mom said something about how inappropriate it was, how you were trying to steal attention. And I snapped. I told her you had every right to wear whatever you wanted, that you were my mother and you'd done more for me than she ever would. And then I realized, I've been treating you like you didn't matter. Like you were just background noise. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mom. I reached over and took her hand, and we sat there together crying, the way we used to when she was little and the world felt too big. I forgive you, I said. But you hurt me, Claire. You really hurt me. I know. She squeezed my hand. I don't know how to fix it. But I want to try. Then we'll try, I said. We talked for hours that day. Really talked, the way we hadn't in years. She told me about the pressure she'd been feeling, the way Trevor's family had expectations she didn't know how to meet. I told her about the loneliness I'd been carrying since David died, the fear that I was losing her too. We cried. We laughed. We ordered takeout and ate it on the couch like we used to when she was a teenager. And before she left, she asked me if she could see the dress again. I took her up to the attic and pulled the box down. We opened it together, and she lifted the dress out, holding it up to the light. It's beautiful, she whispered. I was so stupid, Mom. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's yours, I said. If you want it. She looked at me, her eyes wide. Really? It was always meant for you. She hugged me then, so tight I could barely breathe. And I knew in that moment that we were going to be okay. Not right away. Not perfectly. But okay. A few months later, Claire called me and asked if I'd help her plan a vow renewal, a small, intimate ceremony, just family and close friends. She wanted to wear the dress I'd made. The one she'd rejected. The one I'd poured my heart into. And when the day came, and I watched her walk toward Trevor in that ivory silk and French lace, the pearls catching the light, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because I'd stood up for myself. I'd refused to be invisible. And in doing so, I'd reminded both of us what we meant to each other. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for listening, for caring, for being here. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen or unappreciated or pushed aside, I hope it reminded you that you matter. That your voice matters. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And please, check the description box below for more stories like this one. Stories about heartbreak and revenge and finding your strength when the world tries to take it from you. You never know when you might need one.